or the desperate chase. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone streets of downtown London as Detective Sarah Mitchell received the call that would change her life forever. Marcus Kane, a notorious armed robber who had escaped from maximum security prison just 3 days earlier, had been spotted near Buckingham Palace. The 34-year-old criminal had already killed 2 police officers during his escape and was considered extremely dangerous. Marcus had spent the last 5 years planning his escape from Pentonville Prison. He was serving a life sentence for multiple armed robberies and assault charges. His criminal record stretched back to his teenage years, starting with petty theft and escalating to violent crimes. The authorities knew he was desperate, cornered, and had nothing left to lose. On that fateful Tuesday morning, Marcus had broken into a small apartment just 2 miles from the royal residence. The elderly homeowner, Mrs. Elizabeth Harper, had discovered him rummaging through her belongings. Instead of harming her, something unexpected happened. Marcus found himself looking at old photographs scattered across her kitchen table. They showed a young woman in military uniform standing proudly beside other soldiers. Mrs. Harper, despite her fear, began talking to Marcus about her late daughter, who had served in the British Army and died in Afghanistan 5 years earlier. She spoke with such love and pain in her voice that Marcus found himself listening, his hardened exterior beginning to crack. For the first time in years, he felt a strange emotion he had almost forgotten: guilt. The old woman offered him tea and a sandwich, treating him not as a dangerous criminal, but as a lost human being. She told him about her daughter's dreams of making the world a better place, about her kindness to everyone she met, regardless of their background. Marcus had never experienced such genuine compassion from a stranger. As police sirens wailed in the distance, Marcus knew they were closing in. Mrs. Harper looked at him with sad, knowing eyes and said something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "My daughter always believed that everyone deserves a second chance to do the right thing. She died protecting people, even those who might not have deserved it." Marcus grabbed the small revolver from his jacket pocket and headed toward the door. But instead of threatening Mrs. Harper or taking her hostage as he had planned, he simply said, "Thank you for the tea, ma'am," and walked out into the bright morning sunlight. The police had surrounded the building, but Marcus knew the area well from his youth spent on these streets. He moved through narrow alleyways and side streets, avoiding the main roads where patrol cars were stationed every few blocks. His destination was unclear even to himself, but something was drawing him toward the palace grounds. Detective Mitchell coordinated the search from her command vehicle, studying maps and tracking reports from various units. She had been chasing Marcus for 3 days straight, barely sleeping or eating. This case had become personal for her because one of the officers Marcus had killed during his escape was her former partner and close friend, Detective James Thompson. As Marcus approached the palace area, he could see the increased security presence. Royal guards in their traditional red uniforms stood at attention, while plainclothes security officers moved through the crowds of tourists. The sight of so much authority and order seemed to mock his chaotic, destructive life. The weight of Mrs. Harper's words pressed heavily on his mind. He thought about all the people he had hurt over the years, all the families he had traumatized during his robberies, all the opportunities he had wasted to become a better person. The gun in his pocket felt heavier with each step he took. Royal Guard. James Wellington had been stationed at the main gate for over 6 months. At 28 years old, he took immense pride in his duty to protect the royal family and represent the dignity of the British monarchy. He had joined the military straight from college, driven by a sense of duty and honor that his grandfather, a World War II veteran, had instilled in him. That morning, James noticed something unusual in the crowd. A man in a dirty jacket was moving strangely, his eyes darting around nervously, his hand constantly reaching toward his pocket. Years of training had taught James to recognize the signs of someone carrying a concealed weapon and planning something dangerous. As Marcus emerged from behind a group of tourists, he found himself face to face with James Wellington. The Royal Guard's bright red uniform seemed to represent everything Marcus had spent his life fighting against: authority, order, the system that had failed him since childhood. In that moment, Marcus felt all his anger and desperation boiling over. Without thinking clearly, Marcus pulled out his gun and pointed it directly at James Wellington's chest. The crowd around them began screaming and running in all directions. Other security officers started moving toward them, but they were too far away to intervene immediately. James stood perfectly still, his training taking over despite the fear he felt inside. He looked directly into Marcus's eyes and saw not just a dangerous criminal, but a deeply troubled human being who seemed to be fighting some internal battle. The guard's calm demeanor was so unexpected that Marcus hesitated, his finger hovering over the trigger. The unexpected encounter. Time seemed to freeze as Marcus Kane stood with his gun pointed at Royal Guard James Wellington. The chaos around them faded into background noise as the two men locked eyes in a moment that would define both their futures. James could see the internal struggle playing out across Marcus's face, the conflict between desperation and something else, perhaps the last remnants of his humanity. Instead of showing fear or anger, James did something that nobody expected, including Marcus himself. He began to speak in a calm, steady voice that cut through the panic of the moment. "I can see you're in pain," James said quietly, his military training allowing him to remain composed despite the weapon aimed at his heart. "But this isn't who you really want to be, is it?" Marcus felt confusion wash over him. He had expected the guard to beg for his life, to show the fear and submission that Marcus had become accustomed to seeing in his victims. Instead, he was being treated with an understanding that he hadn't experienced since his conversation with Mrs. Harper just hours earlier. "You don't know anything about me," Marcus replied, his voice shaking slightly. His hand trembled as he kept the gun trained on James, but something in the guard's steady gaze was making it difficult for him to maintain his resolve. "I've done terrible things. I've hurt people. I'm not worth saving." James could hear the pain in Marcus's words, recognizing the voice of someone who had given up on himself long ago. Drawing on his own experiences with troubled soldiers in his unit, James continued speaking in that same calm tone. "My grandfather used to tell me that a person's worst moment doesn't define their entire life. He said that courage isn't about never falling down. It's about what you choose to do when you're at your lowest point." The crowd had been evacuated from the immediate area, but James could sense that snipers were probably taking position on nearby buildings. He knew that if this standoff continued much longer, Marcus would likely be killed, regardless of whether he pulled the trigger or not. For reasons he couldn't fully explain, James felt compelled to try to save this man's life. "What's your name?" James asked, taking an almost imperceptible step closer. Marcus instinctively tightened his grip on the weapon but didn't step back. "Marcus," he answered, surprised that he had responded at all. "Marcus Kane." "Marcus, I'm James Wellington. I've been standing guard here for 6 months. And in all that time, I've never had a conversation as important as this one." James's voice carried a sincerity that penetrated Marcus's defenses. "Can you tell me what brought you here today?" As police sirens grew louder in the distance, Marcus felt the walls closing in around him. But instead of increasing his desperation, James's unexpected kindness was creating a strange sense of calm in his mind. He thought about Mrs. Harper's daughter who had died protecting others. He thought about all the victims of his crimes, and for the first time, he truly understood the magnitude of the pain he had caused. "I met this old woman this morning," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She lost her daughter in the war. The daughter was a soldier like you. She told me that everyone deserves a second chance to do the right thing." Tears began forming in Marcus's eyes as he continued. "But I don't think I deserve a second chance. I've wasted every chance I've ever been given." James felt a deep empathy for this broken man standing before him. He recognized the self-loathing and despair that Marcus carried, having seen similar emotions in fellow soldiers who had struggled with their own demons after returning from combat. "Mrs. Harper sounds like a wise woman," James said gently, "and her daughter sounds like someone who would want you to prove that you're capable of change." Detective Sarah Mitchell had arrived at the scene and was watching the standoff through binoculars from a safe distance. She could see her target, the man who had killed her partner, standing with a gun pointed at a young royal guard. Every instinct told her to order the snipers to take the shot, to end this threat once and for all. But something about the body language of both men made her hesitate. Through her radio, she could hear the audio feed from the directional microphones that had been positioned to monitor the conversation. She listened in amazement as she heard Marcus talking about deserving second chances and doing the right thing. This was not the cold-blooded killer she had been chasing for 3 days. "He's never shown remorse before," she whispered to her colleague, Detective Anderson, who stood beside her. "In 5 years of investigating his crimes, he's never once expressed regret or shown any sign of conscience. Something's changed." James continued his careful dialogue with Marcus, gradually learning more about the man's troubled past. Marcus spoke about growing up in foster homes, about aging out of the system at 18 with no family and no real prospects. He talked about how his first arrest had led to a cycle of incarceration and crime that had consumed his entire adult life. "I never learned how to be anything other than what I am," Marcus said, his gun hand beginning to lower slightly. "Every time I tried to go straight, something would go wrong. I'd lose a job, or someone would recognize me from my record. It was easier to just accept that I was a criminal." James listened without judgment, understanding that Marcus was probably sharing his story with another person for the first time in his life. "But you're talking to me instead of shooting me," James pointed out. "That tells me that there's still something good inside you, something worth fighting for." The conversation had been going on for nearly 20 minutes, when Marcus made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He slowly began lowering the gun, his hand shaking with emotion rather than fear. "That old woman, Mrs. Harper, she gave me something I haven't had in years," he said. "She gave me hope that maybe I could be different." James saw the change in Marcus's posture and recognized that this was a crucial moment. "What do you think her daughter would want you to do right now?" he asked softly. Marcus looked at the gun in his hand, then back at James's steady, compassionate gaze. The weight of all his choices, all his regrets, and all his lost opportunities seemed to crystallize in that moment. He thought about Mrs. Harper's kindness, about her daughter's sacrifice, and about this young guard who had shown him more humanity in 20 minutes than he had experienced in years. The moment that changed. Everything Marcus Kane stood at the crossroads of his life, the gun trembling in his hand as James Wellington's words echoed in his mind. The question about what Mrs. Harper's daughter would want him to do penetrated the last of his defenses. For 34 years, Marcus had made choices based on anger, desperation, and survival. Now, for the first time, he was being asked to make a choice based on honor and redemption. "She would want me to stop hurting people," Marcus whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. "She died protecting others, and here I am, threatening to take away someone else's child. Someone else's future." The gun began to shake more violently as the full weight of his realization hit him. James could see that Marcus was reaching a breaking point, but it was a different kind of breakdown than anyone had expected. This wasn't the collapse of a dangerous criminal, but the awakening of a human conscience that had been buried for decades. "Marcus, you have the power to honor her memory right now," You can choose to be the person she believed you could become. Detective Sarah Mitchell watched through her binoculars, her finger hovering over the radio button that would signal the snipers to take their shot. She had lost her partner to this man, had seen the destruction he had caused throughout his criminal career. Every logical part of her mind demanded justice, demanded an end to the threat he posed. But she found herself holding back, captivated by what was unfolding before her eyes. "I've never seen anything like this in 15 years of police work," she murmured to Detective Anderson. "He's actually talking him down. That guard is performing a miracle out there." Marcus looked around at the scene he had created. Police vehicles surrounded the area, innocent tourists had been terrified and evacuated, and a good man was standing in front of him, showing more faith in his potential for change than Marcus had ever shown in himself. The weight of responsibility, real responsibility for others, rather than just for his own survival, settled on his shoulders for the first time. "If I put this gun down," Marcus said slowly, "they're going to kill me anyway, aren't they? The police, the snipers I know are watching us right now. I've killed cops. I've hurt innocent people. They're not going to let me walk away from this." James felt the delicate balance of the moment. He knew that Marcus was probably right about the snipers, and he also knew that if Marcus believed he had no chance of survival, he might decide to go out in a blaze of violence rather than surrender peacefully. "Maybe they will," James admitted with brutal honesty. "But that's not the point anymore, is it? The point is what you choose to do with the time you have left." This unexpected honesty from James created a profound shift in Marcus's thinking. Here was someone who wasn't lying to him or making false promises, but who was still asking him to do the right thing, even if it might cost him his life. It was the kind of moral courage that Marcus had never encountered before, and it shamed him into recognizing how far he had fallen from any kind of decent behavior. "My whole life I've been angry at the world for giving me a raw deal," Marcus said, his voice growing stronger as clarity began to replace confusion. "I blamed everyone else for my choices, but standing here, looking at you, listening to you treat me like I'm worth saving, I realize that I've been my own worst enemy." James saw tears flowing freely down Marcus's face now, and he knew they were approaching the crucial moment. Mrs. Harper's daughter chose to protect others even when it was dangerous. You can make that same choice right now. You can protect me, protect the other guards, protect the innocent people who are watching this unfold. Marcus thought about all the lives he had damaged over the years. He thought about the families of the police officers he had killed during his escape, about the trauma he had inflicted on his robbery victims, about the fear he had caused in Mrs. Harper's eyes even as she showed him kindness. For the first time in his adult life, he felt genuine remorse rather than just self-pity. "I want to do the right thing," Marcus said, his voice barely audible. "I want to prove that Mrs. Harper was right to show me kindness. I want to prove that you were right to see something good in me." He paused, looking directly into James's eyes. "But I'm scared. I'm scared of dying, but I'm more scared of living with what I've done." James took a careful step closer, close enough now that Marcus could have easily shot him point blank if he had wanted to. Instead of showing fear, James's expression showed only compassion and determination. "Marcus, courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what's right even when you are scared. You've already shown more courage in the last 30 minutes than most people show in a lifetime." In that moment, something fundamental shifted in Marcus Kane's soul. The anger that had driven him for so many years began to transform into something else entirely. A desperate desire to become worthy of the compassion he had been shown. He thought about Mrs. Harper, probably watching this on television and wondering if her kindness had made any difference. He thought about James Wellington, this young guard who had risked his life to see the humanity in a dangerous criminal. "I'm going to put the gun down," Marcus announced, his voice steady for the first time during the entire encounter. "I'm going to put it down, and I'm going to surrender. Not because I think it will save my life, but because it's the right thing to do." James felt a surge of relief and pride, not just for his own safety, but for Marcus's transformation. "Mrs. Harper's daughter would be proud of this choice. You're honoring her sacrifice by choosing to protect rather than harm." Marcus slowly lowered the gun until it was pointing at the ground, then carefully placed it on the pavement at his feet. He stepped back from the weapon and raised his hands above his head, looking at James with a mixture of fear and peace. "Thank you," he said simply. "Thank you for helping me remember who I used to want to be." Detective Sarah Mitchell watched in amazement as Marcus surrendered without violence. She found herself crying as she gave the order for officers to move in and arrest him peacefully. In all her years of law enforcement, she had never witnessed such a complete transformation of a human being. As the officers approached with handcuffs, Marcus looked back at James Wellington one final time. "Will you do me a favor?" he asked. "Will you visit Mrs. Harper and tell her that her daughter's memory helped save lives today? Tell her that her kindness made a difference." James nodded solemnly. "I promise I will." The arrest proceeded without incident, but the impact of that day rippled far beyond the immediate participants. Marcus Kane was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, but he spent his remaining years working with counselors to help other inmates find their way back to humanity. James Wellington continued his service as a Royal Guard with a deeper understanding of the power of compassion and the possibility of redemption. Mrs. Harper received visits from both James and Detective Mitchell, learning how her simple act of kindness had prevented a tragedy and possibly saved multiple lives. She kept the photograph of her daughter on her kitchen table, but now it was accompanied by letters from Marcus, expressing his gratitude and detailing his efforts to become a better person even behind prison walls. The story became a powerful reminder that even in the darkest moments, human connection and compassion can create the possibility for transformation. It proved that sometimes the most profound acts of heroism don't involve physical courage, but moral courage. The willingness to see the humanity in others even when they have lost sight of it themselves.